Transportation Risk Specialties, the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation. This is Tommy Ruke, and it's 2 p.m. Eastern Time. This webinar is presented as an industry update. This title is a hot subject we'll go through in a few minutes. This webinar does not qualify for CE credit. However, we do have a series of CE credits going on right now, and if you need more information concerning the CE, then contact us at the website or call Beth here at our office, and we talk about how to get CE. That's, again, those webinars are presented on the first and the third Tuesday of each month. Anyway, today's the hot subjects. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat window. They will be answered as time allows during the webinar, or later we will answer some questions that might arise. In fact, just in the last couple days, we've posted a couple answers to questions that had come from previous webinars for everybody to look at. In the past, there's been some concerns with the audio problems, people that can't hear us or not. We think there's corrected in the last webinars we did. We have not had that problem. But if you do have a problem and you are having difficulty hearing us, please, again, either in the chat window, make a note that we can't hear you, we lost the audio, and or call us on the 800 number, and we'll address it here in the office. We had more than one person involved in it. Hot subjects for a hot summer. Kind of ironical, this subject that we're dealing here to start with CSA and the problems with CSA, there's two other organizations, the American Trucking Association and the Truckload Carriers Association are presenting webinars, one of which is simultaneous to ours. Another one was the Truck Carriers Association was just finished 30 minutes ago on this same subject, and that is the CSA and the problems with CSA, and this is where we're going to start. CSA has been the game changer. Everybody has heard about it. It's only 3 years old, major impact. It was reflected as a top concern for a motor carrier in the ATRA study of 2012. We, meaning Tommy Ruke and the programs I have done, we talked about CSA at the first time. Back then it was CSA-2010 in Greensboro in October 2008. So we've been dealing with it and trying to provide information concerning this for many years. It's a flawed system. It's not a measurement of safety. The peer group, that's how it's set up, just isn't right. As one of our attorney friends, Rob Moses, says, because everybody's compared against anybody else, we're going to end up with one motor carrier as we weed this out. Even in the FMCSA disclaimer on its website, it clearly says that the Federal Motor Carrier Association, SMS, is an automated system that quantifies the on-road safety performance of a motor carrier and can identify unsafe carrier, prioritizing them for intervention. Then it says the FMCSA is not safety fit determination, nor is it a safety rating procedure to the code. It does not represent FMCSA's final determination about the safety of a carrier. And so the use of the SMS for purposes other than identifying above may produce unintended results and inaccurate conclusions. Yes, even with those statements. Yet, from what we're hearing, that insurance risk that has a poor basic score can cost money at claims time. So this is the thing as far as our insurance is concerned that we have to deal with. Just in the past few months, I've seen an expert witness report from a plaintiff that stated the motor carrier should be liable for an accident, pay more dollars, even punitive damage, because they have an alert, even though the alert had absolutely nothing to do with the accident. It had to do with hours of service alert, yet the accident was caused when the driver had driven less than an hour. Also read an opinion by the way of a judge on another case where they were trying to introduce the SMS scores into the court procedure, and the judge actually got it right. He said that the information had nothing to do with the accident at the time. So that's a favorable ruling. However, the insurance companies are viewing the risk with alerts, out-of-service violations, serious violations, as ones that do not want to provide coverage to almost at any price. They're seeing larger settlements and judgments driven by the insured's CSA information. Yet even by FMCSA's own statement, this information is not a safety fitness determination and not representative of the FMCSA's final determination about the safety of the carrier, the motor carrier, or the insured. To this end, there's a number of people who are fighting this SMCS. There's an article actually in today's Transport Topics that I got that talks about a court case that's trying to hide this information. We have an expert in this area, a friend of our attorney, Hank Seaton, who has been extremely proactive in challenging CSA. So he is going to share his thoughts on this with us. Hank, welcome. Take over.
Thank you. Thank you. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm about as old as Tommy, and I've been representing motor carriers for over 40 years now. And I guess I have been very active in this topic because it really is the most important topic facing our industry since deregulation. It really is the hallmark of what I think is going to be re-regulation of our industry. First of all, just an overview, the effect of SMS methodology on shippers and brokers. Clearly, use of SMS methodology, its publication, the suggestion by those touting it as a safety fitness criteria is going to lead to heightened shipper and broker liability and accident litigation. Tommy is indeed right. This is a Christmas present to plaintiffs' bar, and whether the system is valid, whether it has any correlation to the accident at all, it's being used by plaintiffs' bar to involve shippers and brokers in lawsuits. And when you get additional deep pockets involved in lawsuits, the amount of the settlements go up, bearing no proportion to the at-fault risk involved. So I guess the first question here, and one of the principal questions that we've got to address today is this methodology fit or intended for use by the public? Is it anything that can or should increase the effect? And Tommy, you're going fast on my slides, buddy.
I'm sorry.
Obviously, the methodology, most of us who've examined it would conclude, does not justify the credence that the agency would give it. First of all, as my friend Rob pointed out, if you follow the methodology to its logical conclusion, there'd only be one carrier left. The best way to describe it is that it grades on a curve and that it establishes 10 peer groups, jams every motor carrier into it based upon size and the nature of their business, and then ranks them much as you would a horse race, saying that each time you run the horse race, 4 of the horses are going to be turned into dog food, because if the shipping community is required to use this, it's not to say that everyone in the peer group isn't fit. It's not to say that everyone in the peer group hasn't been determined by the agency to be fit, willing, and able and satisfactory to operate on the nation's roadway. It's just to say that they're damaged goods. And the damaged goods approach is what is leading shippers and brokers to say, can I afford to use a small carrier who has a golden triangle if it means I'm going to have to answer a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, even though the agency certifies the carrier is fit to use? The peer groups alone create a real problem for small carriers, those who tend to operate older equipment. They may have a light out that has nothing to do with safety. Those who have owner-operator fleets, draymans in particular, there is a lot of profiling and prejudice that goes on in the system. Slide 11 or slide 12, please, Tommy. The effect on the insurance market on slide 12 is really, you can see that since the insurance market has skin in the game and is the one who really needs to determine whether or not a carrier is a good insurance risk, is looking for some kind of model to determine carrier safety. One would suggest that there are a whole lot of alternative models that are much better predictors of carrier safety than SMS methodology. but so far it appears that underwriters have taken SMS methodology as a shorthand way to judge carrier performance. Not just that it's a shorthand way to judge carrier performance, but also if that golden triangle is going to subject the insurer to an excess liability verdict because he's all of a sudden going to have to extend coverage to shippers and brokers, it's having the effect of making the insurance rates go up, particularly for small carriers. And obviously, for those of you who are on the line who work with small carriers, who consider them to be friends, who understand that the whole idea of free enterprise and deregulation is that small carriers grow up to be J.B. Hunts, you will look at the increase of insurance rates as a problem that needs to be dealt with effectively somehow. You would think that the insurance industry would be uniform in its opposition to publication of this data, but so far there have been no insurance companies or large agencies to support the effort to take down the publication of SMS scores. One of the things about SMS methodology is, particularly for small carriers, the scores change monthly, and they can change radically for a small carrier. Slide 12, Tommy. 13. You see that the methodology hasn't even been approved for the agency's own use. I'll talk a little bit about a pending lawsuit in a moment, but one would think that if you know anything about administrative process, that before a system is published for use by the public, it should be approved for use by the agency. And for it to be approved for use by the agency, it has to go through a thing called rulemaking in the administrative process. That's the problem with SMS methodology. It has never been through the rulemaking process. The idea that the agency isn't the cop on the block has the real effect of making every shipper and broker into a George Zimmerman and saying, you've got to police your own turf and you've got to make your own decision based upon some kind of flawed systematic analysis whether a carrier is fit for use. Let's talk now a little bit about the systemic flaws in the system. First of all, the peer group anomalies. I told you there are 10 peer groups. 5 of the peer groups were set up with artificial barriers to separate out straight trucks from tandem axle over-the-road carriers. They put the arbitrary provision in that if you operated 30% or more straight trucks, you'd be in your own separate peer group. This put all of the van lines and all of the expediters in the same peer group with the Pepsi-Cola truck who operated within the city limits of Memphis. As a result, all of the van lines and most of the expediters find themselves in a horse race in which they can't compete. And that's because of the difference between over-the-road and the system under which they're examined and the systems that apply within the states. Another systemic flaw is what's called the geographical anomalies. Different states have different emphasis on aspects of enforcement. There's a thing called the probable cause states. Those are about 5 or 6 states in which in order to inspect a truck, a police officer has to have probable cause. As a result, they're particularly suspicious of people with lights out or speeding, and these states are notorious for giving speed warnings. As a result, those speed warnings get built into the profile, and I'll be able to show you in a minute that your score in unsafe driving is largely affected by the states in which you operate, not how you operate. The law of large numbers. The law of large number doesn't need to be a daunting mathematical concept. It's really what anybody who's played the roulette wheel knows. If you play it once, you're probably going to crap out, but if you play it enough, you can act like the house and ultimately spread out the numbers so there's a realistic evaluation of how you operate. a study was prepared for those of us who oppose SMS by Professor Gimple that analyzed the effect of SMS methodology on small carriers, and it clearly proved what one would suspect, which is if you're a small carrier and you have one accident, whether or not it's your fault, and have less than 10 trucks, you're already twice the national average of scores for accidents. Similarly, if you have one speeding ticket affects you a whole lot more than it does the 5,000 truck operator. So as a result, the small carriers are prejudiced very simply by the fact that they're being graded on a curve. Another issue is what we call peer group creep. The way most of these basics are designed, and there are currently 5 reported basics, I guess, in each of the various areas of compliance. In most of these, the more inspections you get or the more violations you get bumped up into a larger tier of carriers. So that if you're a small truck Charlie and you're in the lowest group, by the time you get the 6th inspection and you're being profiled for that, all of a sudden you're competing against the larger fleets. So if you look at this kind of like bracketology in basketball, it's saying if you're in the bottom of the OVC, you get to go play in the Big Ten. It's kind of an unforgiving system that says that the smaller carriers can wake up tomorrow based upon one additional violation and find that their score in a basic has gone up 20 points. Why? Because of that one violation. It may have been as innocuous as a speed warning. No, because all of a sudden they're put in a different peer group. I can't play basketball very well. I sure don't want to be put in a group with the NBA. So you've got that as another anomaly. Then there's one called the enforcement anomaly, which I call guilty until proven innocent. There's a thing in SMS methodology called data queues, and what that's intended to do is to allow an aggrieved carrier to challenge a violation. When you challenge that violation, you make a simple statement back to the agency. The agency sends it out to the state where the violation occurred, and then the state, using whatever system it wants, passes on that appeal. Well, unfortunately, there are a number of states who take the position that even if you had a violation, went to court, and were proven innocent, it still stays on your record. Some states take the position that if you have an appeal, rather than going to an objective third party, it goes back to the officers who wrote it. So there are enforcement anomalies. We get the problems all the time. I got a call in here from a good client the other day. He said, listen, there's an enforcement officer sitting out in Apache Junction in Arizona who, when he stops a truck, if he can't find anything wrong, will hold you up for 3 hours looking. And obviously, I'm not here to beat up on the enforcement officials around the country. Most of them do an excellent job, but there's simply no standardization of what they're looking at, and there's no standardization of appeal. So that results in profiling, which can result in the awarding of scores to unfortunate carriers that they don't deserve. Then there's an item called profiling, and the profiling is intended to say if you are a carrier who has a high score under the SSP program, you'll be waived in and be examined more frequently. To the extent that you are examined more frequently, you would say, well, that's a wonderful opportunity to improve your scores. But as a matter of fact, what happens is the carrier is profiled. When he comes through the scale, the officer says, well, this guy doesn't operate a fleet truck and he's got a high score. There must be some additional reason to look at it. So there obviously are problems in terms of systemic flaws in the system. And we go on to slide 15. Okay, let's look at each of the basics. And when I talk about basics, again, I'm talking about there may be a remaining 6 various areas of compliance in which carriers are measured. The first is the crash basic. The crash basic is hidden because even the FMCSA acknowledges that it is too conditional to prove. The reason for this is what's logged into the computer currently is just every crash or towaway in which a truck is involved, regardless of fault. Because 75% of the crashes are caused by the four-wheelers, it stands to reason that a small carrier who may only have 2 crashes could very well be 4 times the national average, yet none of the faults were none of the crashes were actually its fault. The agency is grappling with how does it use this basic to get any kind of productive data. One would say that when you're trying to drive all of the other basics to determine crash preventability, and your denominator of crash preventability is 75% off, you've got a heck of a time trying to justify any kind of methodology constructed around crash. But it is some of the inside the Beltway people say, well, let's try to refine the crash data by determining crash preventability to get the scores pure. And while that's a noble goal, it could result in a mini trial on each towaway or accident, because if the result is we're going to reduce the number of crashes down to 25%, but still grade the remaining 100,000 measured carriers based upon crash, then it may very well be the livelihood of the carrier to contest each and every crash. The cost of doing this, the cost of doing it with any kind of judicial determination or due process, I think it's very difficult. All of you who are involved in any kind of accident litigation know that the current judicial system can take 4 years to resolve that, and oftentimes the decision is still left up to a jury and nobody understands the result. To think that a bureaucrat is going to be able to call those kind of decisions with any kind of due process in 45 minutes or an hour, I think is a flawed conclusion to begin with. So I think in sum on 16, the inclusion of non-preventables in the raw score is particularly prejudiced to small carriers and distorts any kind of conclusion that can be drawn about the crash predictability of carriers and any of the other basics. Slide 17, Tommy. Unsafe driving, that is the basic in which you're really throwing into the computer weighted scores for speed warnings, lane changes, any kind of safety violation. And what ends up happening is, as I mentioned earlier, you've got this profiling effect. You've got this probable cause effect that involves in some states. Now, to its credit, CVSA, which is the organization of the state officials, is working at trying to come up with some kind of nominal system so that people are judged fairly regardless of the state in which they operate. But this chart is taken from one of my larger clients who operates in 48 states, and they just went and took their number of points accumulated per 100,000 miles by state, and this is what they showed. In Michigan, they have 22.4 compared with 10.5 in Indiana, but the operative number is in most states, the chart showing from Tennessee and less is what they have. So they conclude that they're 20 times more likely to pick up unsafe driving points in Michigan than they are in any other state. Similar analysis has been done by other carriers and shows similar discrepancies. But in unsafe driving, at one presentation I made, at the end of the day, an insurance agent from Montana came up and he said, it's a beautiful day in the Big Sky country because we don't get any unsafe driving points because you can go as fast in Montana as you want to. And I thought, well, gee, yeah, that that pretty well shows the result of peer grouping carriers operating in Montana with carriers operating in Michigan and saying that they're all going to be judged on the same curve. Number 18, Tommy. Okay, the hours of service basics. There is probably nothing more on the industry's mind now than hours of service. As we all know, the effort to appeal the HOS basically went down in flames in the past week or so. Hours of service is a continuing battle that's been fought now for over 10 years. Many of us would say that the failure of the industry to oppose the hours of service back in 2003 has been responsible for what we're now suffering through. We acknowledge that circadian rhythms resulted in saying that driving at night was a bad idea. We acceded to the idea that you needed 10 consecutive hours off in order to be able to drive rested. And as a result, we've got rules that are difficult to enforce that are being more difficult all the time. We now have EOBRs, or electronic logging devices. By and large, most carriers, large and small, are going towards that because a paper log is a very difficult thing to maintain. In this particular basic, over 50% of the violations are form and manner or last change of duty. In other words, the violations that populate saying that a carrier allows drivers to drive tired is really the result of paperwork violations, having nothing to do with how long the driver has been on duty, nothing provable to do with fatigue. So as a result, the take-home is, and this is proven out in the fact, that carriers who do not have EOBRs are far more likely to have high scores than carriers who don't. Again, a question of profiling that really doesn't get at the lick log issue. The issue is requiring or permitting a driver to drive in excess of the hours of service. But this, of the few basics they've got, is one in which the agency says there's the greatest correlation to safety. It's basically unproven based upon the violations that they allege. Let's talk about vehicle maintenance. Vehicle maintenance is one in which tire wear, brakes, and trailer lights make up the majority of the violations. I think it's particularly concerning to the industry that trailer lights, we're not talking about stoplights now, we're talking about the running lights on the side, make up such a large portion of the violations. It's well said that people who operate older trailers will occasionally have one of the filaments in the side lights to go out. Whether it results in an accident, I don't think it's provable, but there sure are a whole lot of carriers with spotted trailers who tend to fall into these levels of violations. And again, if the methodology is used to deny them freight, it may have an effect that far exceeds its purpose. We find in the vehicle maintenance basic, particularly intermodal carriers and now hazmat carriers, are targeted in peer groups for inspection. The continuing problem of the fact that equipment providers maintain the chassis and it's hard to allocate which violations go to the steamship lines and which one are borne by the carriers consistently resulted in the intermodal carriers having higher scores in this basic. And again, they're lumped together with people who have fleet operations and are actually able to maintain the trailers in a higher state. Let's go on to number 20. Driver qualifications. Driver qualifications is really primarily in terms of the on-road inspection, picked up when a driver for one reason or another left his medical card at home. It doesn't have a whole lot to do with whether he's medically qualified. A large portion of the driver qualification violations result on audit when the agency comes in, they look at a driver qualification file, and determine that for one reason or another it's defective. Maybe the report from the last employer didn't get in. So really it is a little used violation. As you can see here, it only measures 3.5% of the agency and is a lesser star in the agency's system for qualifying drivers. I think that the real issue is if you're allowing people to drive under the influence, or the gravity of the violation is significant. Unfortunately, this particular violation measures too few carriers and is largely a paperwork issue. Slide 21, Tommy. Same is true with the alcohol substance. It only measures 0.57% of the industry. It usually is discovered, and the carriers are lit up with golden triangles because they've been audited, and they probably are part of a consortium and are supposed to test a random number of carriers and of drivers per year, and they have missed one. It's something that's fairly easily corrected, but if you're just counting golden triangles, one violation in this basic will light a carrier up for 2 years. Slide 22, please, Tommy. Okay, the agency ultimately, when you get through an analysis of these basics, can't prove a correlation to safety. In the past, their efforts to prove a correlation to safety has been generalized statements like, on average, carriers with higher scores have a slightly elevated crash ratio. But when it comes to judging individual carrier performance, determining whether or not a carrier is going to stay in business or has high or low crash ratios, we don't run a country based upon average. And this has been brought to the agency's attention through the Gallo study, the Gimple study, and the IOB study, which are 3 studies that show that general trend lines are more dishonored in the particular when you start looking at individual carrier performance than they are as any guide towards specific performance. This journey that we've been on with the agency started in 2010 when the agency first announced that it was going to release this information to the public. There was a lawsuit brought by the National Association of Small Trucking Companies and 4 other trade associations challenging the very publication of this. The agency, as a result, came up with a statement and a settlement that confirmed that it was the agency's duty to determine what carriers are fit to operate on the nation's roadway, and said that unless a carrier had been placed out of service or found to be unsatisfactory, it met the federal standard. Now, those of us who are involved in this fight think that that is where the discussion can and should end, particularly with respect to the shippers and brokers. We believe that the shippers and brokers are actually members of the shipping public, and that they can and should be able to rely upon the government to do its job without being turned into a vigilante force. But after that decision came down, the agency and certain people in the industry who were promoting SMS methodology continued to hype the situation that, oh well, as long as it's published, it'll be used in court, the plaintiff's bar will use it, and hence the shipping public should use it. That has resulted in 2 hearings on the Hill, one by the Small Business Administration and one by T&I. Both of those hearings, I think it's fair to say the agency's position did not go very well and have resulted in an Inspector General study of SMS methodology and one by the General Accounting Office, both of which we're awaiting results. Let me talk now for just a moment about the agency's view. The agency has very good intentions. It believes, first of all, that its duty is to be transparent and accountable. Those are buzzwords in Washington, that the government should be transparent and accountable. It seems sometimes as though the transparency and accountability is somewhat selective, but it's with that mantra that they say that this should be published for the public's use, regardless of whether it's been determined to be fit for their own use. Part of the issue is the agency has repeatedly said that its sole mission is safety, and that it really isn't particularly concerned with industry or the effect of reduction of motor carrier service to shippers and brokers, or with the collateral damage that may be done to carriers who are profiled as being unsafe to use yet safe to operate. Slide 25, Tommy. I've told you about NASDAQ versus FMCSA and the results of that litigation. I need to tell you about another piece of litigation. It's called ASEC versus FMCSA. In May of 2012, you may recall the agency sua sponte came out with a website publication entitled Guidance to Shippers, Brokers, and Insurers. And in that publication, without any rulemaking or any other vetting that I'm aware, the agency repudiated basically that its decision was the law and suggested that it would not opine upon state law liability for negligent selection. It also touted its SMS rulemaking methodology and said that the actual safety rating that a carrier had may have been made several years ago and might not be the most up-to-date thing that shippers and brokers should rely upon. Because of the Hobbs Act, those of us who have been critics of SMS methodology had 90 days to file suit. We did. The matter has been thoroughly briefed. Oral argument is currently set for September the 10th. It's a major piece of litigation which has gotten very little publicity. We can talk maybe later about why that's so. But the issues are whether the agency can publish guidance which is contrary to existing rules without rulemaking. That's a question of constitutional law that needs to be challenged because the current administration is making rules by internet publication, arbitrarily choosing which laws to enforce and which ones not to. The underlying issue is the unconsidered effect on industry and whether internet publication is a substitution for due process. In rulemaking, an agency is required by statute to analyze the adverse consequences of its decision, particularly with respect to small business under the Paperwork Reduction Act and the Reg Flex Act. The National Transportation Policy says that in administering the laws, the agency is required to encourage competition and small businesses, and it's our argument that those issues haven't even been examined. Slide 27, Tommy. We really have an industry divided. Currently there are certainly major trade associations who, for a whole lot of reasons, want to curry favor, I think, with the agency and really have been reluctant to be a vocal critic of SMS methodology. Tommy said, in words I probably wouldn't have chosen, that I have been extremely involved, and it may be that there comes a time when extreme involvement is necessary. Hopefully we've been able to demonstrate that there are other aspects of this issue that most of industry has been asleep at the wheel. I think it's fair to say that there are many carriers who put a lot of time in being the best in the game of SMS methodology, and now they want competitive advantage. And if little carriers are not here to compete against them, it's probably all the better for them. So there is some idea of what is the effect on our operations if the excess competition is eliminated through this measure. There are indeed cottage industries that have sprung up selling monitoring services, and you know, the advertising dollars are obvious if you read the trade magazines and see the intricacies of the systems that are being sold. And finally, I think the press and the shippers have been particularly slow to respond. Shippers, usually the traffic department is not the most important issue the shipper faces, and I don't think the severity of the issue is percolated up to the shipping public. It'll probably just take a few more bad judgments until they awake, and it may be too late to do anything if they do. There have been a good series of articles run in CCJ, and you can go to their website if you're interested in reading more about the other side of CSA. I think their articles have been well done. Section 28, please, Tommy. The road ahead. The agency has announced that in August, this month, it is going to go back and issue additional guidance on its website. Now, I'm not exactly sure how they're doing this in light of the fact that they have got a binding decision entered in the Court of Appeals that says to a large extent what should be on the website. But what we think they're about is to try to set up additional support for use of SMS methodology, give the public an opportunity to comment, and then use that comment as a basis to cure any prospective problems they have with our court settlement. So if we are successful in our court settlement in saying that the FMCSA website is premature because it hadn't been through rulemaking, they'll say, well, we started the rulemaking process. The second thing that we think they're about is to use the August filing and the comments that are received then to bolster what is scheduled to be a release in December or January of a new safety fitness determination rulemaking. The ultimate goal and stated goal of the agency is to do away with compliance reviews in which you come in and actually examine a carrier and prepare a report for which there's judicial appeal. In some sense, they ultimately want to be able to grade carriers out based largely upon a system of reported violations. This ultimate goal is something that they were proposed to release in 2010. That's why the program was named Safety, Compliance, and Accountability of 2010, but it looks like it may very well be 2014 before it comes out. So that's kind of part of where we are with the road ahead. Next slide, Tommy. The ultimate threat. I think at the end of the day we may lose the objective appealable compliance review, and that carriers' continued economic viability may be replaced by monthly published compliance numbers based upon which a safety rating will be assessed. You know, you take a premium for a guy, for him, expect him to be in business a year. It may be that carriers are turned on and off on a much shorter basis. There is, in fact, a tendency going on here now for more and more conditional safety ratings to be issued, and then carriers to linger in an unsafe condition because the agency says it doesn't have the manpower to come back and re-audit those carriers. So obviously the bent is to profiling more and more carriers as in some sense marginal or deficient. And you know, unless we as people who are committed to the industry really closely look at this, we have to realize that the real name of the game is this whole vicarious liability negligent selection issue and what it's going to do to insurance rates and judgments. Next slide, Tom. Okay, for commentary, I think the FMCSA's intended use of the scores is anti-competitive. I don't know that ultimately it's going to be any improvement over SafeStat, the former system that was criticized by the IG. I think the real issue is, while we'd all like to be free marketeers and reduce the role of government, probably in keeping the highways safe, like keeping the airline safe, is the role of the federal government. It ought to be a single source, and the government's better off doing it than to leave it up to the peril of shippers and brokers. I think where we're headed is that only in trucking will the federal regulators abdicate to their job and allow state juries to substitute their judgment on this negligent selection issue. ATRI and Wall Street studies suggest that over 50% of the shippers think that SMS is the law and that grading on the curve is required. It is, to me, absolutely amazing the numbers of people who have just thought that SMS somehow came into effect in 2010 and, oh well, it's intended for use and should be used. That's part of our mission, is to say it's not too late to look at it. The ultimate question, why would anyone in the trucking industry think that encouraging shipper and broker liability under state law, exacerbating settlement demands and judgments is a good idea? I certainly don't think that's the case. If, in fact, the $1 million worth of BI and PD that a carrier is basically required to handle now is not right-sizing it given the current judgments, then let Congress decide that maybe it should be raised to $2 million or whatever, but that's Congress's decision. It's not the unilateral decision of the agency, nor should it be the decision of people who want competitive advantage. Tommy, is there a next slide, or is that it?
That's it, Hank. Hank, let me ask you a question. One of the objectives you have here for the time being is the request is to hide this information from the public, not to stop the enforcement officers to use it as who they need to look at more closely. Is that not what we're thinking about?
Well, yeah, it is, but I mean, I guess the pejorative term about hiding is what is offensive to me. You know, it's not a question of whether or not it's hidden. Obviously, we think that since the procedure for rating carriers is so fundamentally flawed that it shouldn't be published. It shouldn't be published because it's not intended for its purpose. You know, it amounts to what you get into in the drug industry if the FDA all of a sudden without any study came out and said aspirin kills you. You would have a problem saying, look, hide the information? No, it's not a question of hiding the information. The information is so bogus, it's not intended to alarm the public. Now, if they think they've got studies that says that aspirin results in a higher risk to the population, let them study it. Let them do any kind of internal study they want. They can work on SMS methodology, but as it was originally intended, in order for them to have a way to prioritize carriers for objective safety compliance reviews under objective standards. And, you know, I guess what all we're saying is use it for its purpose, but acknowledge its limitations. And where we have thrown them a curveball is they would have liked for the industry just to have accepted this back in 2010, and by now they'd be grading everybody on the curve. and that's still where they want to get this, is to create a computer that will spit out that half of the carriers or that they are big enough to measure are deficient and are in some sense damaged goods. And you know what we're saying is, let's get back to the principle of this. It's anything that says to the shipping public that you can't rely on half of the carriers out there because they're in some sense damaged goods is the equivalent of saying go to the airport and start looking for golden triangles. There was a Southwest flight that they had a landing gear problem last week. Does that mean that the traveling public shouldn't fly Southwest and the FAA should go out and put a big golden triangle above the ticket booth? We think no. It's obviously an indicia that the FAA needs to look at Southwest safety program, not that they need to go and suggest that Southwest is unfit to fly. And, you know, I think that kind of analogy, if one thinks about it, works throughout the industry. You know, if you go catch a cab in Chicago, you rely on the hotel to whistle down a cabbie. You are not required, even though he may not speak English very well, to say, are you sure you're qualified to drive this cab? And how, have you ever been arrested for driving while intoxicated? And how long have you been on duty? It's those kinds of things that makes hash out of an industry. And it's our argument that hash is being made out of the trucking industry, and it's affecting not only shippers and brokers, but also the insurers, and particularly the carriers who were promised that our industry is the opportunity for a blue-collar worker to get a piece of the American dream. And that's what I think this really is aimed at affecting. You know, I work with small carriers on a daily basis. I have people that I have represented for 20 years who call me and say, I can't get loaded by this major shipper because he uses SMS methodology. And if he would just look at the violation, if he just would grade on the curve, he'd know that this has absolutely nothing to do with my crash ratio. One of our witnesses who had 2 golden triangles testified on the Hill that she had a crash ratio of 0.2, which is 15% of what would be required to get a conditional safety rating under the existing law. Yet she was losing business, and that's the issue that we're trying to make clear. And clearly, if you know people on this call are insurance agents who are trying to get their longtime clients underwritten, they need to understand that the golden triangles are not necessarily any indicia of the compliance of the company.
Hank, I understand that, and I appreciate that, and obviously you're passionate for this, and I understand it, and clearly the thing that I've been waiting for, as you already pointed out for the 5 years, is the final safety fitness determination, which is supposed to be made on a more objective basis, not just the peer group and that kind of stuff, but we'll have to see that. But Hank, thank you for your time here today and sharing this with us and your passion. For you who are a part of this, we were going into more depth here on our annual conference. We're going to have in October. Dan Murray of Actuarial will do update on his study that Hank's already alluded to with the CSA. Steve Bryan from Visual will be there and using his comparison, and Rob Mosley's there, and I'm going to meet with Rob on the 30th of this month to talk about how he sees CSA affecting claims. If you want to sign up for the annual conference, that's how you do that. A couple other things I want to talk about, and Hank's already discussed this, is that this CSA and other things are putting major pressure on the smaller motor carriers. For a long time, we said about 85% of all the people with the OT number have less than 6 powers units. This might not be correct today because that data is a couple years old. But as Hank said, CSA seems to be affecting them almost to discriminating against them. Hank was talking about this profiling, and this is what it seems like. Scores, 1 out of service makes their numbers jump up, yet 6 months later, it could be driven down to a very favorable level. Shippers will not do business, as Hank just represented here, if people in alerts. Drivers will not drive for motor carriers with alerts, and insurance carriers are having problems providing insurance for them. We understand that part of it because it is reflected in claims. We'll discuss the small truckers' problems in a later presentation, but as a son of a small trucker whose father started with one truck, I am concerned, as Hank suggested, that this is stopping a lot of people from getting into this industry and becoming harder, which doesn't really have an effect on the claims that might occur. Severity. This is one of the problems that we have, is that the allegation is, and I do not question this because I've talked to enough insurance carriers, that at claim time, at settlement time, the scores that we're looking at CSA has driven up the severities with other things. There was a news release that was made that you might saw a couple weeks ago concerning a Representative Cartwright that wants to increase the insurance requirements. In that news release, he said that they were introducing this legislation to keep the highways safer and protect victims' rights. Well, the move they want to make is to change the limits of coverage from 1980, from that was moved from 300,000 to 750,000. And by the way, so this is a little known fact. The 91 filing that we have now, in 1980, there was an X added to it. The 91X was there to allow insurance carriers to layer the required coverage. And so in those days, most insurance carriers did not have reinsurance in place or other underwriting criteria in place to justify more than the 300,000. So there was ability then to layer it, where one carrier made a filing at 300,000, another carrier made a filing at 450x the 300 to meet the minimum 750. Well, if Cartwright's suggestion to go to 4.4 million, taking in inflation, there's going to be a lot of this layering. Projections are the limits won't increase that much. In fact, but the limits will increase. One of the proposals that was supposed to be part of MAP that I read is that they were going to double the limits from 750 to minimum to 1.5 million, and then from 1 to 2. The problem is then when you get to 5 to double to 10, and that's where the resistance was. A good friend of ours and good friend of Hank's, Rob Mosley, has suggested that maybe the higher limits will help be able to settle some claims within those limits, because what's happening now, as they look at, is that the claims are bad enough and there's maybe bad law of trying to find some additional deep pockets. So the severity, so what will the increase be? From 750 to 7.5 million to 2 million minimum. This will address the victim's right. The other thing that Cartwright though said that bothered me is Congress intended to use the insurance minimum to encourage insurers to inspect trucking companies before underwriting policies. Man, that's speaking a whole lot. They want us, the insurance industry, to also police the safety of our motor carriers, as well as put up the money in case they have a crash. I just have a real question with that mentality that's expressed there, and later we'll talk more about it. It'll bother me. He is saying that insurance carriers should not insure unsafe truckers. To me, this is a strange position. If unsafe, it seems to me to that the FMCSA should shut them down, as Hank suggested, and not us to do any more screening but that as an insurance provider. Severity, the effect on insurance, premiums will be increased. This is happening now. How much more will the new limits increase premium? Who knows? But it will put additional pressure on the smaller truckers because of the additional costs, and they're not going to be able to recover that from their shippers or brokers. We appreciate you attending this webinar. We look forward to you and the people in your organization participating in upcoming events. We do have a Motor Carriers 1 and 2 training class in Orlando that will be done in 2 weeks, on October 22nd and October 19th to the 22nd. We do have the advanced underwriting for people who are moving from underwriting risk with 1 or 2 trucks into fleets that will be in September. We have introduced also a garage seminar that we're going to be doing in September, then our annual conference in October. We will do another basic class in November of this year. All these will be presented in Orlando, Florida. And to sign up for it, you can look at the transportationriskspecialist.com. Our next seminar for the truck stops on our committed to our second Thursday of each month will be September the 12th, 2013. These webinars are open to members of the Motor Carriers Insurance Education Foundation and the TRS members only. If you have any questions or you have interest in the membership, if you're on a trial basis, let us know. We look forward to you participating in our continuing efforts to bring subjects to the insurance industry that affect our truckers on a daily basis. With that, we'll end this webinar. If you have any questions, please email it to this location here, and we'll try to address those. Again, Hank, thank you for your participation, and we're out of here.